Before that night, my life was simple. I was Cynthia, the little girl who loved playing with her dolls and running barefoot outside with the neighbors' kids. My hair was always braided neatly by my mother every Sunday evening, and I'd go to school with fresh ribbons in it. My father, Papa, was someone I admired. To me, he was a giant, strong, respected, and kind. He worked as a carpenter and sometimes brought me wooden toys he carved himself. I still remember the small chair he made for my dolls. It was painted blue, and he let me sit next to him in his workshop as he worked, sawdust floating in the air like tiny golden flecks. At school, I would draw pictures of our family, me, Mama, and Papa, standing in front of our small house. I would show him the drawings when he came home in the evenings, and he would pat my head saying, "My artist, you'll make us proud one day." When I turned 9, everything began to change. One morning, I woke up to see blood in my underwear. I panicked, thinking I was hurt. I ran to Mama, crying, "Mama, I'm bleeding." Mama was peeling yam in the kitchen. She didn't look up at first. "Where?" she asked sharply. I pointed at my skirt and she dropped the knife. She grabbed me roughly by the wrist and pulled me into the bathroom. There, she told me things I didn't understand, something about womanhood. "Don't let any man touch you," she warned, her voice stern. "And stay clean, you hear me? You're no longer a child." I didn't feel like a woman. I was just scared. From then on, I noticed my father looking at me differently. At first, I thought I was imagining it. He would stare at me for too long when I brought him water, his eyes lingering on my chest or my legs. Sometimes he would brush my shoulder gently and say, "You're growing up so fast, Cynthia." It made me uncomfortable, but I told myself I was being silly. He was my father. Fathers don't hurt their daughters. The night it happened, it was raining. The sound of the rain hitting our roof used to comfort me, but that night, it sounded like a warning. I had gone to bed early. Mama had been complaining of a headache, so she went to sleep first, and Papa stayed in the living room. I heard the sound of the radio as I drifted off to sleep, the soft hum of Igbo music playing in the background. Sometime later, I woke up to the sound of the door creaking open. I thought it was Mama checking on me. I turned slightly and froze. It wasn't Mama. Papa stood in the doorway. The light from the hallway outlined his figure, making him look taller, scarier. He didn't say anything as he stepped into the room and closed the door softly behind him. "Papa?" I whispered. He didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the side of my bed and sat down. His weight made the mattress sink, and I felt myself sliding toward him. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. "Shh," he said softly, brushing my hair from my face. "Don't be scared, Cynthia." I didn't move, I didn't say anything. "You're my special girl," he whispered. "This will be our little secret." His hand covered my mouth when I tried to scream. The ceiling became my focus as I tried to block out everything else. I stared at the crack that ran across the plaster, counting in my head, 1, 2, 3, 4, until it was over. When he finally got up and left, I couldn't move. I stayed curled in my blanket, my body shaking. My father's words echoed in my ears, "Our little secret." In the days that followed, I tried to act normal. I forced myself to smile at school, tried to focus on my homework, and pretended that nothing was wrong, but it felt like my world had shattered. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The images were burned into my mind. I wanted to tell Mama, but I couldn't. The words were stuck in my throat, suffocating me. What if she didn't believe me? What if she blamed me? Papa was always so kind, so loving. How could anyone think that he could do something so terrible? But every time I looked at him, I felt like I was being suffocated. The way he looked at me, the way he touched my shoulder, my arm, as though claiming me for himself. It was as if the man I had once known no longer existed. I tried to avoid him. I stayed in my room as much as possible, doing anything I could to escape his presence. But he always found me. He would come into my room, asking if I needed anything, his smile always too wide, too fake. He would say things like, "You're growing into such a beautiful girl, Cynthia." It wasn't just the looks he gave me. It was the way he touched me now, the way his hand lingered on my arm a little too long or rested on my back a little too low. It made my skin crawl. But I had nowhere to turn. Mama was too busy with her work and her own troubles to notice what was happening to me. I wanted to cry out to her, but I couldn't. Every time I looked at her, I saw a woman who had no idea that the monster was right under her roof. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to tell Mama. I had to. I ran to the kitchen where she was sitting, and I opened my mouth to speak. But before I could, Papa appeared behind me, his hand on my shoulder. "Everything okay, Cynthia?" His voice was soft, too soft. I froze. I couldn't speak. The words stuck in my throat like sand. Mama looked up at me, her brow furrowing. "What is it, my dear?" Before I could answer, Papa squeezed my shoulder, his grip firm and reassuring. "It's nothing, Mama," he said. "Cynthia's just being silly." And just like that, I closed my mouth. I nodded, swallowing the truth, hiding the storm inside me. That night, as I lay in bed, the silence was suffocating. I wanted to scream, but the fear of what might happen if I told anyone made me quiet. The days blurred into each other, each one feeling heavier than the last. I woke up every morning dreading the moment when I would have to face Papa, pretending that everything was normal while my heart screamed for help. Papa's behavior grew worse. The subtle touches, the lingering glances, all became more frequent. I could feel the weight of his gaze on me, especially when Mama was out of the house. His presence felt like a storm cloud hanging over me, always threatening to burst. One day, as I was sweeping the porch, I heard his voice from behind me. "Cynthia," he called softly. I froze, my heart racing. I didn't turn around, hoping that if I stayed still, maybe he would leave me alone. But the next moment, I felt his hand on my back, sliding down to the small of my waist. I jumped and spun around. "Papa, please don't touch me." He didn't look angry, just confused, like I had said something strange. "Cynthia, I'm just showing you affection. Don't you love your father?" I stepped back, my breath quickening. "I don't want your affection." He stared at me, a smile spreading across his face. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was a smile that made my blood run cold. "You'll understand one day. But for now, just know that I'm doing this because I care about you. You're special to me, Cynthia, and you'll never have to worry about anything again." I felt my stomach twist. "I don't want this, Papa. I don't want your love." His face darkened for a moment, and I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen before. A flicker of something dark, something dangerous. "You'll learn to accept it," he muttered before walking away. I stood frozen in place, my hands shaking as I gripped the broom, trying to steady myself. This wasn't love. This was something else, something that I didn't know how to name but feared with every fiber of my being. I couldn't live like this anymore. The weight of my secret, the burden of keeping quiet about what Papa was doing to me, was crushing me. I felt suffocated, like I was trapped in a never-ending nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. I began to avoid Papa as much as I could, staying in my room, pretending to be asleep when he called for me. But no matter how hard I tried, he always found a way to slip into my life. It was one afternoon when Mama was at the market that things came to a head. I was sitting in the living room trying to distract myself with a book when I heard the door creak open. My heart dropped into my stomach. It was Papa. I stood up instinctively, my body tensing. "What do you want, Papa?" His eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of regret, but it was gone too quickly to be sure. "I just want to talk to you, Cynthia." His voice was low, almost coaxing. I wanted to scream, to tell him to leave me alone, but the words caught in my throat. His presence made my legs tremble, my throat dry with fear. I backed away slowly, but he stepped closer, his face inches from mine. "You don't understand, do you, Cynthia?" he whispered. "This is the way things are, you and I. There's no one else. Just you and me. We belong together." I shook my head, tears welling in my eyes. "No, Papa, please. This isn't right. It's wrong." His hand shot out, grabbing my wrist so tightly it hurt. "It's not wrong, Cynthia. Don't listen to anyone who tells you that. They don't understand, but I do, and you'll learn to understand too." I struggled to free myself from his grip, panic rising in my chest. "Please, let me go. Let me go." But he wouldn't let me go. His grip tightened as he pulled me toward him, and for a moment, I felt like I was going to suffocate. The room spun, the walls closing in on me. Just as I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I heard the sound of the front door slamming open. "Mama." I didn't even realize how much I had been holding my breath until I heard her voice. "Cynthia, what's going on?" Papa's grip loosened just enough for me to break free. I ran to my mother, who stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes flicking between Papa and me. "Cynthia?" she asked, her voice trembling. I couldn't speak. I just stood there, shaking uncontrollably. My heart was racing, my chest tight with the fear of what might happen next. Papa stood behind me, while trying to keep his composure, but I could see the anger in his eyes. "She's just upset, Mama, nothing to worry about." But Mama wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were focused on me, searching my face for the truth. "Mama," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Papa, The words stuck in my throat. How could I tell her the truth without shattering everything? But before I could say another word, Papa stepped forward, his hand landing heavily on my shoulder. "Don't listen to her, Mama. She's just being dramatic." Mama's eyes widened as she looked between the two of us, her brow furrowing in confusion. "What are you talking about, Cynthia?" I opened my mouth to speak, but the weight of everything, the fear, the guilt, the years of silence, pressed down on me, and I couldn't get the words out. Papa turned to Mama, his face softening. "She's just a child. Let's not make a scene." But Mama wasn't fooled. She looked at me again, her eyes searching, and for the first time, I saw doubt flicker in her gaze. Something wasn't right. "Cynthia," she said softly, taking a step toward me. "What's going on?" I looked at her, my mother, the woman I had always trusted. I wanted to scream, to tell her everything. But I was so scared, so afraid of what would happen if I did. It felt like the world was crashing down around me, and I had to make a choice: stay silent, protect Papa, or speak up and risk losing everything. But for the first time in a long while, I felt like I couldn't stay silent anymore. The room was tense. I could feel every inch of air in the house thick with dread. Papa stood a few steps behind me watching, his face a mask of false innocence. But I couldn't look at him anymore. My eyes were locked onto Mama, who was staring at me with confusion written all over her face. I wanted to speak, to shout, to scream the truth, but the words were stuck, lodged in my throat like a stone, too heavy to move. I felt small, like a child again, too afraid to upset the world that had once felt so safe. But I couldn't hold it in any longer. The truth needed to be said, even if it shattered everything. "Mama," I whispered, barely able to get the words out. "Papa, he's been doing things to me." The silence that followed was unbearable. My heart was pounding so loudly that I thought for sure she could hear it. I didn't dare look at Papa, but I could feel the heat of his anger pressing against my back. Mama's eyes widened. She blinked, like she hadn't quite understood what I had said. "What are you talking about, Cynthia?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Papa," I said again, louder this time, though my voice still shook. "He's been touching me. He's been hurting me, Mama." The room seemed to tilt as my mother's face contorted into a mixture of confusion and disbelief. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She glanced over at Papa, who now stood rigid, his hands clenched into fists by his sides. "No," he suddenly shouted, his voice booming through the house. "Don't listen to her, Mama. She's lying. She's just upset because I've been hard on her lately." I turned to look at him then, for the first time fully meeting his eyes. His gaze was cold, but there was something else behind it, something darker. "No, Papa," I said, my voice shaking, but more forceful now. "You've been doing things to me. You've hurt me. Please, believe me." I turned back to Mama, pleading with my eyes. She stood frozen, her mouth open, but no words came out. The silence was so heavy it was suffocating. "You're lying." Papa's voice cracked as he stepped forward, grabbing my arm roughly. "You don't know what you're talking about. Don't make me do this. Don't you dare embarrass me in front of your mother." Mama's gaze flickered between us, but there was something in her eyes now, something that made me hope, just for a second, that she might finally believe me. I pulled away from Papa, shaking with fear and anger. "Mama, please, don't you see? He's been doing things to me. I'm not lying." Her face paled, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Something that wasn't just confusion, but a glimmer of fear. I stepped closer to her, my voice barely a whisper. "Please, Mama, please believe me."